Well, most people have probably heard the phrase, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And really, that's a pretty applicable phrase to homesteading and growing your own food. But today we're going to talk about not putting all your squash in one basket, or at least the theory of how this all applies to homesteading. As a bit of a recap for anybody who's sort of following us sort of more recently, we grow 4 varieties of squash. And the reason we do this is for ease of seed saving, because there's 4 species, 4 varieties, and they won't cross with each other. So one of our varieties behind me here is our yellow crookneck squash, which is a summer squash. And as you can see from the state of it, it's done. Now we do have a few larger ones that are almost kind of gone gourd-like. Those are actually our squash that are going to be for seed, which we're going to probably rip these out here this afternoon. The other 3 varieties that we grow are all sort of what you would consider winter squashes. Some of you have seen a sneak peek of sort of what our squash harvest has looked like, but you haven't seen all of it. That was just our last minute dash to get things harvested before the frost came and killed everything off. We definitely had a few hardships this year. Of course, one of our sort of hardships this year was squash bugs.
The nemesis.
As you can see, there's one right there. Now, we are going to let the chickens up in here pretty shortly, and hopefully that will help with anything that's sort of kicking around, because they will ruck everything up and find these little buggers. But between squash bugs, as I can see down here, there are quite a few more underneath this yellow crookneck squash. But between squash bugs and cucumber beetles, we definitely had some hardships there early on in the season. 2 other sort of hardships that kind of hit us in a combo effect was raccoons, which they did not target the squash, but because we used the 3 sisters minus the beans, we grew our squash in amongst our corn, they kind of destroyed everything else in the process. So they really set a lot of our Canada crookneck squash in particular back, like severely, to the point when we pulled a lot of the vines, we have very little fruit, as you'll see. The plants got so set back that they were still trying to flower, trying to do what they needed to do. And of course, although we didn't have an official drought, we definitely had a drier summer. There was pretty much most of July and part of August was pretty dry. And that didn't help with growing squash, because as everybody knows, squash do like a fair bit of moisture. So all of those excuses aside as to why we didn't do as stellar this year, the crux of this video is to talk about not putting all your eggs in one basket. And really what I think that means in the homesteading context is never bank on just one thing feeding you and being productive, or one thing being productive every year, year after year.
So what you're saying is potentially squash is not going to save the world?
No, what I'm saying is you can't you can't bank everything on one kind of squash. So as I mentioned before, we have 4 kinds. One of those kinds actually did probably better than it did last year. Now we will check the weight.
It did better than it's ever done for us.
Exactly, and that was with the setbacks. Now another one of those kinds, our large blue Hubbard type squash, we didn't get anything. They all died. They all succumbed to the cucumber beetles and basically the 1-2 punch of cucumber beetles and squash bugs. So we do realize that they can be a bit of a trap or a sink to attract those insect pests. And this year they definitely did, and unfortunately we got nothing. So something that in years past has always been a frankly huge producer for us, because that's a Cubrita maxima variety, we may actually look at something different and do some research and see if we can find a Cubrita maxima that is a little more tolerant of cucumber beetles and squash bugs. So stay tuned for that, but we're going to take you and show you kind of what we did end up getting. Well, since we've harvested, we have all of our squash in the greenhouse at the moment. Most of it to cure. And as you can see, our green striped Kershaw squash have done, I would say, quite well. I'm very curious to see if we have more or about the same weight as last year. I have a feeling we're pretty much on par. Our Canada crookneck, well, far less than 2021, but still not disappointed. As much as I've kind of said it really got set back, which it did, it still produced. So this is still a high producing, sort of definitely staying variety for us. I honestly think the raccoon onslaught was most of the setback with this. They did get some of the cucumber beetles and squash bugs, but not nearly as much. They seemed fairly immune to it, relatively speaking. So definitely blaming this sort of lower harvest on the raccoons. But we need to get some things out of the greenhouse. As you can see, we still have our sweet potatoes in here as well. So we're going to go ahead and bring these inside, and then we're going to do some weighing and see how we actually did in the numbers.
You've seen outside, you've seen the mess that we had, and then you've seen what we've got so far. And yes, it was not a fantastic year for us for squash. We had a few different battles that we've already talked about. I'm not going to talk about them again. But when we get it all compiled and we actually look at those final numbers, it really is still very impressive and a lot of food. So we're going to show you, just kind of spread out here, what we've got and talk a little bit about our tallies. So as we've got everything piled here, we do have our snake gourds included in this. Now we still have 3 little ones there. They're little, they're not that little. But we still have 3 left to use, and we have 2 that were a little bit too far gone, so we're hoping we're going to get viable seeds from them. They're not actually a squash, which is why we grew them. So like I was saying, snake gourds are not included in these totals, but the rest of this is. First off, here we have our yellow crookneck summer squash, which we harvested 24.5 pounds this year, which is still significant. We've got lots in the freezer. It's been great. Some of these are getting a little far gone now, so we're going to have to get creative with how we use those. But in the previous year, in 2021, when we were squash wild, we actually harvested 78 pounds. So we're at about a third of what we harvested last year. But we're still happy with the numbers and going to strive better for next year, but we had a bit of trouble with some of the plants and so on and so forth, and we'll make tons of excuses. Next on the list was our Canada crookneck squash, which we still got a lot of meat out of these here. So for our Canada crookneck this year, we got 59.5 pounds. And to be honest, most of them were in great condition. We had a few breakages and a few little human errors by me, of course, that they're going to have to get used up pretty quick. But most of these are going to be perfect for storing on the shelves and eating throughout the winter. And I do think the fantastic finale on our squash this year was our green striped Kershaw squash. This is the best year we have ever had for these. They did amazing. 78.25 pounds basically of the green striped Kershaw. And again, as I mentioned, we did not get any of our big blue squash this year due to bugs and other stresses. So this is the squash harvest for this year. So in total for our winter squash this year, we harvested 138 pounds. And remember, like I said, we haven't included the snake gourds in these weights, but compared to the previous year, which we were 442 pounds, it is a huge difference. It's going to be interesting to see how we can make this work, how much it's going to last, and kind of find that balanced number in between where we need to be. Because last year, I think we grew a lot more than we needed, although it made great animal feed. And this year, I think we're going to fall short. So it will be very interesting to try and meld the two for 2023. But I'm going to end this video just showing you our most amazing squash for this year. 1 second. Look at that beauty. It's heavy. This is almost 17 pounds of green stripe Kershaw squash. Give it a try.